Here's a quick update on this E46 M3 that we filmed a while back. So this car came to us with drivability issues, it was not running properly, had idle issues, it was bucking and all kinds of stuff. So I'm in 6th gear and I'm about to floor it. So when I floor it, when it gets to right around 2,500 RPM, you'll notice the whole car start jerking around. Ready? That's floored. And it's starting now. And you can see the whole thing. It's almost like it's hitting a brick wall. And mainly all that was because of all of the aftermarket modifications on this car. Let's go over the modifications really quickly before we talk about what the issues were and how we fixed them. So as you can see right off the bat, we have this CSL Style Air Box. So this is the whole intake that would be on the E46 M3 CSL. It gets rid of the map sensor, which would be usually right here, and this whole carbon goodness is installed instead. And then on top of that, when you get rid of the map sensor, you want to plumb in a map sensor and stuff like that. They had that installed on here, but it was not hooked up properly, and there was a lot of issues with that. This car also has super Sprint headers, and it's got a pretty custom exhaust all the way running through a Dinan Muffler. So that's pretty much the gist of all the modifications. And this car is a 2003 M3, so it actually came with the MSS54 DME. The CSL has the MSS54 HP, but it's specifically made for the CSL with a couple of other changes in the DME itself. But what we ended up doing, we actually bought an entire HP DME off of another car and installed it in here to upgrade it from the normal MSS54. You can get your stock MSS54 upgraded by installing separate chips and doing other modifications to the DME itself to make it into an HP, but the best option is honestly just to get an HP DME itself and then save your stock one as a backup if you need it. The reason you want to do that is when you get an HP DME, you're able to use the values of the map sensor that you install. The DME will be able to read it, and then you can change the tune based on that, because that CSL Airbox gets rid of the map sensor completely. So we got the HP DME installed. The map sensor used to be in the rail right here. In my previous video, when we first diagnosed this car, I had thought this was an original CSL style rail, but it actually wasn't. They put an adapter to run a map sensor, and that can throw off the readings a little bit. And instead, what we ended up doing, we got this adapter that ties into the brake booster hose. So this is the same vacuum that you would see at the rail, and it ties into the hose. So you just cut the hose, put the adapter in, and that allows you to run the map sensor. So we got a new map sensor with the correct calibration for the CSL map and everything. Got that installed, spliced it right here. It is also much cleaner. You don't have any wires running across over here, and it just fits a lot more closer to the DME, so you can run the wires directly. We also made sure the intake air temperature sensor is the correct one. So this one I believe is off of an E34, but it has the same calibration as the CSL. So with all that stuff done, all of the wiring confirmed, we went ahead and programmed the MSS54 HP DME to the CSL software. So there's a couple ways to do this. You can do it with the BDM, which allows you to run the whole CSL bootloader and all of that, or you can flash a modified bin file, and that pretty much is all the CSL stuff, but it's made to run off of the HP, the normal non-CSL bootloader. So it's up to you whichever way you want to do it. The easiest way is to do it with the modified software that's still a CSL software, but runs off of the non-CSL bootloader. But with that being done, now this DME is practically a CSL DME minus the provisions for the CSL intake flap. So the original CSLs actually had a flap that goes into this intake section, and that pretty much regulates the air at certain RPMs. So, you know, it's mostly for drivability and stuff like that. We don't have that in here, so we had to tune accordingly. Also, this engine is the stock M3 engine. It's not the CSL engine. The CSL had different camshafts. We had to adjust the CSL tune for the non-CSL camshafts. We did that. But after all of that, the readings for the fueling and everything is still going to be for the CSL. It's not completely made for this engine and all the modifications this engine has. So then we had to install a few other things. Like I mentioned before, this car already came with the Super Sprint headers, which have provisions to install a wideband O2 sensor. So a wideband O2 sensor, it gives you more accurate readings for the air-fuel ratio. And that's what you have to use when you're tuning. Let's go inside the car. Let me show you guys how I installed that, and then we'll start talking a little bit more about the tuning. So we've got the wideband sensor installed into the glove box. And the reason I did this is the wideband O2 sensor is mainly there for us to help tune this car. So you're not gonna really need it once the tune is proper. You don't really have to look at it all the time, especially because this is a naturally aspirated engine. It's not forced induction, so we're not, really worried about anything else. We just want the car to be running properly. I talked to the owner of the car. There's a couple of options with the whole tuning situation. We can go get it dyno tuned by a professional tuner. I am by no means a professional tuner. I do know how to tune these cars. I do know how the engines work, how the tuning works. And I offered him that as well, where I can make it so it's very drivable. And that's the route that the owner chose to go with. He wanted to focus more on drivability as opposed to performance. I know you might think, then why install the CSL Airbox and stuff? The owner actually bought the car with the Airbox and everything. So he just wanted the car to be drivable and drive well at that. So that's what we ended up doing. We did a whole street tune. I installed the wideband O2 sensor by running all of the wires, like I said, to the glove box. Then we also installed this serial cable, which has a USB port. The main reason I did this is so I can data log all of the stuff while we're street tuning. So when you're street tuning, you're mostly driving the car on the street under street conditions. You want to go through different, altitudes, different temperatures, and all of the different scenarios that you might see normal driving. And we data logged everything to the computer, and we also data logged all of the normal engine parameters from the DME. So with that, all that information, you're able to make adjustments to the tune. So the main adjustments that you really have to make to the CSL factory tune for the non-CSL engine is fueling. So that's the main thing that throws everything off. And with all of the modifications on this car, your car is going to be completely different. So there's no one tune that's going to fit your car perfectly. And that's why we street tuned it. The wideband O2 sensor just plugs in like a normal O2 sensor onto those headers. If you have aftermarket headers that don't have the provision for a wideband O2 sensor, you will have to install a separate bung on there. Most tuners, when you go to a dyno tuning session, they actually put something just at the very end of the muffler, which is not as accurate, but it still gives them a gist of what the actual AFR readings are. For us, we decided to just put it, because we already had the bung. We threaded it in there, ran all the wiring, ran it to a fuse, and this is the AEM UEGO wideband O2 sensor. They have a whole kit for it. I'll have all the stuff that we use down below. So once we have all of that stuff installed, once we started tuning, let me show you guys some of the fuel tables that you can adjust. Now when you're street tuning, it is a lot more work than dyno tuning, because you have to do all the data logging, and you actually have to drive it under various scenarios. So you want to, go wide open throttle sometimes, you want to do normal idling and normal acceleration, normal shifting and stuff like that. So you have to drive it a lot. We put on approximately 300 miles street tuning this thing, but now it runs properly. The AFRs that I was targeting, so that's the thing, like when you're doing any kind of tuning, and the main reason I'm not making a full complete DIY, it's a lot of information. It would not be able to fit in one video. As you could probably already tell, the amount of information I've given, it's been quite a lot of information. So here's just a quick gist of it. When you're accelerating wide open throttle and stuff like that, you want to target around 13.0. That's the AFR that you really want. The normal idle AFR is going to be right around 14.7, which is stoic. Probably not saying that right, but that's the normal idle AFR that you're targeting when you're just idling or when you're cruising. You want 14.7. Now anything over 14.7 is running lean, which means that it's getting more air and not enough fuel. To be completely safe for the engine, you'd rather have it have more fuel than air, and that's going to be running rich. So 13 is kind of rich, but when you're accelerating and when you're wide open throttle, you want it between 12 and 13, and 13 is still pretty good in terms of efficiency as well. So the way I have it tuned, whenever it's wide open throttle, so 80, 90, 100% load, we're targeting right around 12 to 13 AFR. And then when you're just driving normally, we're targeting close to between 13 to 14. And when you're cruising or when you're just, just idling, we're targeting 14.7. And all of that stuff you do by adjusting the fueling, or you can even adjust the map sensor calibration and stuff like that. We didn't really have to mess with that because all the stuff that we have is pretty much factory CSL specs, and that's the software that we installed on this DME. So software I was using was Tuner Pro, and that allows us to adjust those maps. The two maps that we were adjusting were the wide open throttle and the base fueling map. So that's 18 by 3 and 18 by 12. So that's going to be under is called Einspritzung. I don't speak German, and that's how, I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, but Einspritzung, and the two maps are going to be KFTI NRF and KFTI NRF VL. So those are the two maps, and when you make those adjustments, that's going to allow you to adjust the fueling at different RPMs at different load levels. And the way you do that, so when you're data logging, the software I use to data log is called Testo. I'll also have that link down below, and that just plugs in to the normal OBD2 port with the KDCAN or input cable, and then you hook it up to your computer, and that allows you to adjust the specific parameters you want, and you can see what the values are, because you're also going to hook up the wideband O2 sensor to the computer as well. And we're going to be able to data log all of those simultaneously, and then you go back, look through the data log, see what the values were, and then you adjust the fueling based on that. So we made a lot of adjustments, and when you're making these adjustments, you want to do very minor adjustments. You don't want to do anything too crazy. That way you can see exactly how the values are reacting. So we probably did like 2 to 3 points at a time, adjusted the fuel at certain RPMs and certain loads based on what that AFR reading was. Now, I know that might seem like a lot of information, but that's pretty much what we had to do to get this car to run the way that it does now. Let me show you guys how it runs and how everything's looking, and you guys will be able to see for yourself. So we're on the road now, and things that I was doing before we did all this tuning and everything is whenever it was driving fine, I mean, it was pulling okay as well, but whenever you would put the car under load, so for example, if you're in 5th or 6th gear and you're going like 45 miles an hour, and then you stomp on the gas, like you actually like wide open throttle, it would start jerking around really frantically, and it was just bucking and all kinds of stuff. It just was pretty much falling flat on its face. So I'm in 6th gear, and I'm about to floor it. So when I floor it, when it gets to right around 2,500 RPM, you'll notice the whole car start jerking around. Ready? That's floored, and it's starting now. And you can see the whole thing. It's almost like it's hitting a brick wall. And that was mostly because the car was not getting enough fuel. The engine wasn't getting enough fuel whenever you would stomp on the gas. So it was getting too much air, not enough fuel, and the DME would just freak out and not know what to do. And then once it got to a certain RPM, so let's say around 3,500 RPM, it would just catch itself and make the adjustments. Because the computer is actually pretty smart. It can adjust based on whatever values that it's seeing from the normal narrowband O2 sensors, and it can adjust the fueling up to a certain extent. But once it gets past that certain extent and where it can't make any more adjustments, then it'll just throw a check engine light, or it'll put the car in limp mode or whatnot, where it won't let you damage the engine. Now for us, so we are on the street right now, and it idles perfect. There's no more jumping around in the idling. There's no other bucking or anything going on, and I'm going to show you guys that here shortly. A couple other things that we did find though, when I was installing the wideband O2 sensor, I noticed that some of the header exhaust manifold nuts had backed out. So some of the nuts were not even there anymore, and that can also cause major issues. So whenever you have an exhaust leak like that, it's going to let some of the outside air into the actual header, right? And that's going to throw off the readings from the O2 sensors. Whether you have a wideband, narrowband, doesn't matter. It's going to throw the readings off whenever outside air is getting in. So the wideband O2 sensor that we installed, all you really need is a ground, and you're going to need a power source and a 10 amp fuse in between. So you can just tap into one of the fuses on the fuse box in the glove box. You can even watch one of my Angel Eye videos to show you some of the fuses that you can use. And I'll try to link and write down a lot of this stuff in the description as well, because I know as I'm talking there's a lot of information just being spewed out. I'll try to link all the stuff, all the software that was used and all of that as well. But now we're on some open stretch of road. Let's see how it does. So we're in 6th gear, we're at 2,000 RPM, so I'm gonna just wide open throttle and you'll see how it behaves. Obviously it's gonna struggle, but no bucking, it's getting the proper fueling, and once it's actually in the right rev range, it's going. So we've put on about 125 miles since the last tune revision. And another thing that you guys want to consider if you are going to be doing something like this yourself, there's a limited amount of flashes that you have on your DME. So whenever you're flashing the DME, the BMW software has an internal pretty much like counter that counts how many times you flash the DME. So if you're doing a lot of revisions, there are ways to work around it. There is software that allows you to reset that flash counter. On the MSS54 and MSS54 HP DMEs, that software is called MSS Flasher. Now, some of these softwares do require you to buy licenses, and when you buy the license, that allows you to use the full capability of the software. But as with anything, when it comes to tuning, you really want to do your research before you start messing with anything. And that's probably why some of the tuners charge so much. And tuning just in general is very gate kept, especially for BMWs and cars that are not as popular. If you look at LS stuff, so GM, Camaros, Corvettes, anything LS 5.3, 6.0s, you'll find all kinds of information and forums just for tuning and all of that. And you can actually reference some of that stuff to learn more about what you need to do and what you need to adjust. The BMW community is working a lot more on ungatekeeping some of that stuff and releasing some of that information. And I'll have some of the links in the description below where you can learn more about this stuff. Some of the GitHubs that have a lot of this XDFs and definition files, and even just the software files that you would need in order to do any of this tuning stuff. And that's part of the reason why, if I make this video, a full in-depth video on all of this, it's still not going to be able to cover as much of the information as there is. It's just you have to do a lot of reading, a lot of researching, and a lot of learning before you're able to start tinkering with it. So yeah, all that stuff will be linked down below, but I know a lot of people had asked for an update on this car and if we were able to fix it, and the answer is yes. So happy to have this car running as well as it does now, and I'm really excited for the owner to finally enjoy the car, because this car, like I said in the last video, has not run properly in probably 5, maybe 6 years. And I believe the original owner that did these modifications also commented on that video. And if you are watching, we finally got everything sorted out and it is running like a dream. And let me tell you, if you did all these suspension modifications as well, it handles amazing. That's all for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you guys have any questions, leave them down below. If you guys need any one-on-one assistance or diagnostics help, make sure you go on my website, www.shoplifetv.com. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you guys in the next one.